It's unlucky number 13 for Segaiden as we look at the Sega system, not by Sega.
Total eclipse of the heart.
Before we move along to 1985, we need to do a little SG-1000 house cleaning. Well, sort of. There were 8 releases created for the SG-1000 system that were actually not created for SG-1000, nor were they made by Sega. The Othello Multivision by Tsukuda Original is a remarkable historic curio, a relic of an era where everyone was still trying to figure things out, including Sega. Its existence firmly establishes SG-1000 as the direct midpoint between its technological siblings, the MSX and ColecoVision, which shared much of its internal architecture. Like ColecoVision, SG-1000 existed in a computer variant. The SC-3000 was a far simpler piece of work than the Atom, as it simply added keyboard input to the console rather than a full horsepower upgrade and mandatory magnetic media. But as with the MSX computer, Sega reportedly toyed with the prospect of licensing out the SG-1000 spec as a platform standard. That doesn't really seem to have panned out, though whether that's because Sega reconsidered, or because prospective licensees weren't super interested in a piece of tech that was overshadowed at launch by a more powerful rival, I'm uncertain. A few third-party variants of the SG-1000 did show up in various regions, however, including the Pioneer TV video game pack SDG5, a curious expansion module for a specific model of Pioneer television. Somewhat less arcane was Sukuda Original's Othello Multivision, a standalone chunk of hardware that contained the innards of an SG-1000. Longtime VideoWorks viewers will recall the name Tsukuda Original from a very long time ago, back when Game Boy Works was Game Boy World. Tsukuda created a Game Boy adaptation of board game Othello, which only appeared in Japan and in Europe under the Nintendo label. Othello was basically Tsukuda's ticket to fame, a trademarked variant of Reversi that they converted into video game form whenever possible. Othello will definitely show up again on this channel, but the company's legacy in video games starts here with their very own dedicated Othello console. The Multivision stands apart from the stock SG-1000 in a few ways. Now, the original SG-1000 model had hardwired controllers, but the Multivision comes with a controller built into the console itself. It also includes a 16-key alphanumeric keyboard, which obviously can't be used as a full keyboard, although some models of the Multivision did allow you to attach an SK1100 keyboard to it to turn it into a proper ersatz sort of SC3000 system. First of all, it truly is an all-in-one device. Why a keyboard that spans numbers 1 through 8 in letters A through H? Because Othello Multivision is designed around its namesake, the game Othello, which plays on an 8x8 grid. Sukuda designed this to be a lean, mean Othello playing machine. The console is unique for including a full version of Othello as a built-in program ROM, making it the one official SG-1000 compatible release that can't be played on Sega's own hardware. Of course, Sukuda would hedge its bets in 1985 by letting Sega produce its own version of Othello, which was arguably superior to this one. If nothing else, Sega's interpretation can be played with a simple 2-button controller input rather than requiring Tsukuda's integrated keys. This seems like a wild, way out there choice for a console. Why create a system dedicated to Othello? Curious, I did some digging online and came up with some earlier examples of Sukuda hardware that gave the Multivision some much needed context. Tsukuda Original had been an early adopter of handheld hardware, creating a few different adaptations of Othello in the vein of Mattel's LED handhelds and Nintendo's LCD-based Game & Watch line. As far as I've been able to tell, about a year before the SG-1000 launch, Tsukuda Original created a deluxe portable Othello machine, complete with an 8x8 LCD grid and, yes, a 16-key alphanumeric keypad. Not only that, but this Othello portable system was molded in the same plastics in the same colors as the Othello Multivision, a sort of Famicom-like cream with red accents and blue backs. The Multivision, then, is simply the grown-up version of that handheld, one capable of plugging into a television. The visual continuity would have spoken clearly to anyone who frequented the electronic games section of Japanese toy stores circa 1983. This was Othello, but now in color. I have no idea how well this console sold, but it evidently stuck around long enough to see a couple of revisions. One minor tweak, and one new colorway that changed to a more muted gray that fell suitably in line with the SG-1000 too. The second model, the FG-2000, was friendlier to play thanks to support for external controllers for Player 1. Additionally, Sukuda released 8 standalone cartridges for the system. These are almost completely identical to SG-1000 carts, with the one difference being a slight change in tooling to change up the Sega branding to Sukuda Original on the back. SG-1000 and Multivision carts are interoperable, and it's here we find the other two members of the SG-1000 Shitano. Some of these games are seemingly rare and obnoxiously expensive these days. And as with Space Slalom and Pachinko, definitely not worth a four-figure investment. Thanks to the magic of online ROM archives that allow you to borrow a game if you delete it within 24 hours, we can look at all 8 of these games. Well, 9 actually, I suppose, if you count Othello itself. Yes, it's Othello, also known as Go for babies. You take control of one side of a board and attempt to flip your rival's pieces to the same color as your own by surrounding said rival's pieces. I think this version seems like a pretty respectable interpretation, but it's difficult to say as I don't actually have the means to attach hardware this old and limited to my recording setup to try it out. It's impossible to play this game on a device like the analog Mega SG, unfortunately. While it will run, you need the integrated buttons to issue commands. I'm sure it would probably be possible to hack together some sort of controller to make the game run on alternate hardware, but why in God's name would you do that? This is a neat footnote, but it is a 100% inessential addition to the SG-1000 library when a proper Othello cart exists. Anyway, on to the real Multivision releases. So far as I've been able to determine through online resources, all Othello Multivision games were created, both published and developed internally, by Tsukuda Original, with one exception, catalog number 1, Qbert, which Wikipedia claims, perhaps spuriously, was developed by Konami. I'd believe it though, Qbert for Multivision is the best Multivision cart by a long shot, a solid and satisfying adaptation of the arcade original. For starters, I feel like this cart stands alone for being arguably the only Multivision release to capitalize on the console's integrated control stick. Qbert was a game based around diagonals, and most home conversions suffered due to the cardinal orientation of console controllers. Even systems with joysticks, like Atari 2600, could have trouble making Qbert feel convincing. But with its small stick designed to be friendly to diagonal inputs, anchored in the console itself, Multivision turns out to be remarkably well suited to Qbert. This version is presented in a slightly more bare-bones style than the ColecoVision port Americans are more likely to be familiar with. It lacks stage intro screens, or a proper title screen for that matter, and its heads-up interface lacks a lot of the details seen in the arcade and Coleco versions. Even the escape discs appear as flat colors rather than shimmering with a rainbow effect. On the other hand, the audio design sounds a lot closer to the coin-op game, even if Qbert's famous string of cartoon obscenities upon losing his last life comes across as a blast of static here. Of course, what really matters is gameplay, and in that respect, Qbert on Multivision sticks the landing. The arcade game put an interesting twist on the territory control concept of Pac-Man and other similar works by dropping you onto a pyramid of blocks seen in an isometric viewpoint. Players control the title character, a small orange fellow with a round body, spindly legs, and a huge honker, but no arms. Qbert finds himself trapped in a hellish void floating on the pyramid, whose component blocks display a different color on each face. By hopping at diagonal angles, Qbert can move along the upper face of these blocks, altering the block's color each time he lands. This comprises the meat of the gameplay. Each stage gives you a target color to aim for, and you need to keep hopping around until all the upper faces have switched to that hue. Initially, this takes only one hop, but after completing about half a dozen stages, Qbert will need to land on each block multiple times before it eventually switches over to the target color. Tragically, while Qbert's sole skill in this world is to jump, he can't jump in place to flip colors consecutively on the same block, meaning you can only perform multiple changes by hopping back and forth between blocks. As an action, in and of itself, moving between blocks isn't so difficult. What makes Qbert so tough, one of the most challenging arcade games of the Golden Age in my opinion, is that you need to bounce around while avoiding all the various hazards that hop across the blocks at the same time, some of which can be pretty mind-bending. At the most basic level, you need to avoid balls that drop onto the second highest tier of the pyramid and make their way down before dropping off the screen at the bottom and cycling back up to the top again. The balls have no mind of their own and are essentially passive threats, but they randomly fall to the left or the right as they descend, creating a little uncertainty as to where they'll end up. A more active threat comes in the form of Coily, an aggressive serpent that does actively pursue Qbert around the pyramid. It hops at a very slightly slower rate than Qbert's top speed, but it's relentless and direct. Those traits also happen to be Coily's weakness as it happens, as you can lead him around the maze with no uncertainty, because he'll always home in on Qbert, even if that pursuit proves fatal. Qbert can hop off the edges of the pyramid, which will normally be fatal, but you can safely hop onto the discs hovering alongside the playfield. Rather than plummeting to your death, you'll instead be whisked to the top of the pyramid. But if Coily is in pursuit, he'll hop right off the side and be taken momentarily out of the action. These aren't the only dangers bounding about the stage, however. You also have a few other random factors to deal with in the form of 2 pairs of other creatures. First, the green guys, Sam and Slick. While not directly harmful to Qbert, as you can hop on them for bonus points, they're tremendously annoying, as they revert any tile they land on back to their previous color, erasing your hard-fought progress. More vexing are Ugg and Wrongway, the 2 purple creatures. Though these guys don't have the same aggressive nature as Coily, they're nevertheless dangerous to the touch and will kill Qbert on contact. What makes them particularly tricky to deal with is the way they move. Rather than getting about in the top faces of blocks, they hop along the side faces instead. This can make their movement not so much unpredictable as confusing, because their physics appear to work sideways, and the arc of their jumps can sometimes cause them to strike Qbert from a direction that feels instinctively safe. The Multivision cart carries forward all of these elements, and with its responsive controls, it plays exceptionally well, making it easily one of the best console conversions of the game at the time of its late 1983 debut. If only the rest of the Multivision's library lived up to Qbert's standard. Sadly, the rest of the Multivision library plays more like Guzzler, a mediocre port of a C-tier Tech-On arcade title. Evidently this, like the rest of the Multivision library, was developed internally by Tsukuda Original, which really makes you wish someone had told them there's no shame in asking for help sometimes. Guzzler, if you can believe it, also has a sort of post-Pac-Man vibe to it, in that you're a critter in a maze trying to avoid enemies while completing a few specific actions. In this case, you need to put out fires, which you do by spewing water at them. Guzzler gets its name from the fact that its protagonist is a strange little creature whose body doubles as a water tank, which means he's only good for a few blasts of water before you need to refill it, which you do by, yes, guzzling water from random puddles you encounter along the way. Very sanitary. You can use your water blasts to put out the fires that dot each stage. Once you extinguish all the fires, you move along to the subsequent level. It's pretty simple. However, the fires spawn fireball monsters that move erratically through the maze and will sometimes give chase to Guzzler. They too can be quenched with a spurt of water, but the fireballs spawn infinitely while you only have a limited amount of water to guzzle for ammo. So you need to move efficiently to put out the flames while avoiding becoming trapped without a belly of H2O. A few random power-ups do appear occasionally that will top you off, but you can't really rely on these. Guzzler in arcades had a huge variety of different level layouts, but on Multivision you can only play 3. A Pac-Man looking semi-partitioned maze, an extremely open screen that takes about 5 seconds to complete, and a dense, spiraling maze in which you're most likely to lose the majority of your lives. If Guzzler reminds you of anything, it's probably Pop Flamer. That game also had a variety of stages in which you needed to clear out objects and could fend off enemies with a short-range attack that could only fire a few shots before running low on juice and requiring a refill. I think Guzzler is the better game, if only because its controls are less wretched here, but otherwise, these games are more or less a wash. Guzzler has a super minimalist presentation here, and some utterly hateful sound effects, the kind that will make you regret the existence of television speakers. It's a C-tier arcade work given C-tier treatment. Fitting, I suppose, but definitely not a game worth tracking down for hundreds of dollars in the year 2021. That said, by comparison to Space Mountain, Guzzler is a downright masterpiece. If Guzzler is an analog to Pop Flamer, Space Mountain feels like someone at Tsukuda Original looked at Space Slalom and said, right, we can create something even more amateurish and clumsy than that. I'm not 100% convinced Space Mountain even works. Every review and YouTube video I can find ends at the same place. About all this game has going for it is its bold vision of trademark infringement. Not only does Space Mountain bear the name of a venerable Disneyland attraction, it's also a straight-up rip-off of the Death Star Trench Run featured in Atari's Star Wars arcade game. Imagine that masterpiece, except seemingly coded in BASIC by a novice programmer, and you've got Space Mountain. Novice programmers kludging together rickety versions of popular hits was a grand tradition in the late 70s and early 80s, and many a top-flight programmer got their start by assembling a half-functional Space Invaders variant. Sometimes these amateur knockoffs were even good enough to see retail release. The thing about Space Mountain is that its Star Wars ripoff isn't nearly good enough to have made it to stores. The reference is unmistakable from the fact that you very definitely control an X-Wing craft gunning down TIE fighters to the way the game culminates in an attempt to launch a torpedo into the Death Star's exhaust port. However, this is an abominable effort in every respect. For starters, the space combat section is downright laughable. Your enemies move in huge, staggered chunks, and your targeting reticle has an equally clumsy feel. Fake TIE fighters sort of stagger step in, growing larger, and as long as you aim and fire in roughly the same block of space as them, you'll destroy them. I suppose it's possible that they fire back at you, but truth be told, I played through this half a dozen times and never lost a life here. It's hilariously easy. That's okay though, because the second phase is as impossible as the first is toothless. Eventually you'll blow up enough enfeebled, copyright-infringing bad guys to encounter a small rectangle in space that apparently is what passes for a Death Star. Close in on this death slab and you'll enter a trench-run viewpoint. The trench is exceptionally wide and void of hazards, but as you skim along its surface, you need to control both your fighter and a targeting cursor at the top of the screen, somehow. I assume the cursor is for aiming and launching torpedoes at the exhaust port, but I can't seem to make it work. Worse, as you skim the trench, an enemy bomb or something flies at you and homes in on your fighter. To the best I can figure, it is impossible to dodge this projectile. If there's a way to complete this section, I'm at a loss for what it might be, and the internet offers no solutions. Maybe this is another one of those situations where you need to have access to the Multivision console itself and use one of its integrated buttons to perform some sort of action. Or maybe this game is just not very well made. In any case, I'm going to go ahead and call it here. This is surely the worst game on the greater SG-1000 platform. It would take Sega a decade to fully redeem themselves with the excellent Star Wars Arcade. In the meantime, this is the holiday special of Star Wars game adaptations. The kind of thing you give to someone as a Life Day gift to tell them you hate them.
A day that makes us want to celebrate.
All in all, this was not a great way to put a final stake in 1983's heart. And next time on Segaiden, we'll look at Multivision's attempts to mutilate 1984 as well.